What's the fastest you've ever regretted saying yes? My coworker Lily offered me $200 to bartend at her backyard wedding reception, with one weird rule: don't serve any alcohol to her brother Walker no matter what. All she said was, Walker was an alcoholic who got violent when he drank. She never mentioned that he'd once bitten a bartender in the neck for refusing to serve him deep enough that he needed stitches to save his life. I found that part out later. I said yes, and the reception was beautiful until Walker showed up during the toasts, already slightly buzzed from somewhere else. He came straight to the bar with this friendly smile and asked for a whiskey neat. When I said I couldn't serve him, his smile flickered but stayed in place. Come on, man, it's my sister's wedding, he said. And when I apologized and said no, he laughed like we were sharing a joke, but I could see his jaw muscle twitching. 20 minutes later, he came back, this time with a maid of honor and 2 groomsmen, trying to use the wedding party as leverage. This guy won't serve me at my own sister's wedding, he announced loudly, making everyone uncomfortable. When I still refused, the maid of honor offered to get the drink for him, but I had to say I couldn't serve anyone who was giving drinks to Walker. She looked confused, and Walker's face went red. Are you seriously babysitting me at my sister's wedding? He asked, loud enough that half the reception turned to look. By the time they cut the cake, Walker had tried 5 different approaches, each one angrier than the last. He offered to pay me $50 for 1 beer, then $100. He tried reaching behind the bar himself until I had to physically block him, all while the photographer was trying to take candid shots nearby. He told family members I was discriminating against him, that I was on a power trip, that I was ruining his sister's special day. Each rejection made him louder and more aggressive, and I started genuinely worrying about what would happen when the reception ended, and I had to walk to my car. During the father-daughter dance, Walker grabbed a champagne flute from someone else's hand, and I had to step out from behind the bar to take it from him. We ended up in this humiliating tug-of-war over a glass, while the DJ had to lower the music. You're ruining her wedding, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. You're just some nobody my sister hired to humiliate me on her special day. When I finally got the champagne away from him, he shoved me hard enough that I knocked over a flower arrangement. Lily rushed over in her wedding dress, begging Walker to just leave, saying she'd call him tomorrow and they'd talk. The groom tried to calm him down, but Walker shoved him too, making everyone gasp. Walker looked around at all the wedding guests staring at him, at me standing there still holding his champagne, and his face went dark with rage. This isn't over, he said, pointing at me. You embarrassed me at my own sister's wedding. You made me look like a drunk in front of my whole family. He stormed out, knocking over chairs on his way. The reception got back to normal pretty quickly with the DJ turning the music back up, and Lily's friends trying to salvage the mood. Everyone kept telling me I'd handled it well, that Walker always tried to ruin family events, that he'd cool off by tomorrow. By 11, the older guests had left and the young people were dancing, and I was actually relaxing, thinking I'd earned the easiest $200 ever. Walker was probably at home sleeping it off, and I'd never have to see him again. I was packing up the bar supplies while the last guest danced to slow songs when we heard a car screech into the driveway. The music was loud, but not loud enough to cover the sound of someone kicking in the side gate. Everyone went quiet as Walker appeared at the edge of the tent, completely wasted now, swaying, but somehow more focused than before. He was holding a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a tire iron in the other, his eyes bloodshot and locked on me. Where's that bartender who thought he could embarrass me at my sister's wedding? He slurred, taking a step forward as everyone backed away. Lily screamed, Walker, no! But he wasn't looking at her, just at me, tapping the tire iron against his palm as he smiled. He took another step toward me, and I backed up behind the bar table, my hands already reaching for anything I could use. The wedding guests scattered in every direction, some running for their cars while others froze in place, watching. My fingers found the soda gun hose just as Walker raised the tire iron over his head. I squeezed the trigger and sprayed soda water straight into his face, the stream hitting his eyes hard enough to make him jerk back. He swung blind and wild, the metal bar whistling past my head and crashing into the bottles behind me. Glass exploded everywhere, champagne and wine mixing on the ground as I dropped and rolled to the side. My hand found the fire extinguisher under the bar, and I yanked it free from its bracket. Walker was wiping his eyes with one hand, still swinging the tire iron with the other, cursing and spitting as he tried to clear his vision. The metal bar smashed into the spot where I'd been standing, sending more bottles flying. I pulled the pin on the extinguisher and aimed the nozzle at his face, squeezing the handle hard. White foam blasted out in a thick cloud that covered his whole head and chest. He stumbled backward, coughing and gagging on the chemical spray, his arms waving to clear the air. The tire iron dropped from his hand for a second before he grabbed it again, but the foam gave me space to move toward the edge of the tent. Someone behind me was yelling that they'd called 911, their voice high and panicked, but Walker stood between me and the house where everyone else had fled. He wiped the foam from his face with his shirt, his eyes red and streaming tears but locked on me with pure rage. The whiskey bottle in his other hand sloshed as he steadied himself, then he charged at me with the tire iron raised again. I grabbed the ice bucket from the bar and threw it at his legs as hard as I could. The metal bucket hit his shin, and ice scattered across the grass, making him stumble but not fall. He kept coming and swung hard, the tire iron catching the edge of my shoulder as I tried to dodge. Pain shot down my whole arm like electricity, making my fingers go numb. I grabbed a folding chair with my good hand and held it up between us like a shield just as he brought the tire iron down again. The metal bar crashed into the chair frame with a sound like a bell, bending the aluminum legs. He swung again and again, each hit bending the chair more until it was just twisted metal in my hands. I shoved the ruined chair at his chest and ran for the driveway, my shoulder burning with every step. His footsteps pounded behind me, getting closer. The whiskey bottle flew past my head and exploded against someone's car, showering the hood with glass and alcohol. I threw my arms up to shield my face, but felt sharp pieces slice into my forearm, warm blood immediately running down to my elbow. The photographer appeared at the back door of the house, waving both arms frantically for me to come inside. I changed direction hard, my shoes slipping on the grass, and sprinted toward the door, with Walker right behind me. His breathing was loud and ragged, mixed with curses and threats about what he'd do when he caught me. I dove through the doorway, and the photographer grabbed my shirt to pull me all the way in. We both slammed our weight against the door, and I held it while she turned the deadbolt. Walker hit the door a second later, the whole frame shaking from the impact. He pounded on it with both fists, screaming that I couldn't hide forever, that he'd find me and make me pay for embarrassing him. Each hit made the door rattle in its frame, and I was sure it wouldn't hold. Through the kitchen window, I could see him stalking around the side of the house, looking for another way in, still carrying that tire iron. The photographer handed me a stack of of kitchen towels for my bleeding arm while she dialed 911 again on her phone, telling them our exact address and that someone was trying to break into the house with a weapon. I pressed the towels against the cuts, watching through the window as Walker went back to the driveway. He stood there for a moment, swaying and looking at all the cars, then raised the tire iron and brought it down on my windshield. The safety glass spiderwebbed but held for the first hit. He hit it again and again until the whole windshield caved in, chunks of glass falling onto my dashboard and seats. He moved to the next car and smashed its driver's side window, then the next, working his way down the line of vehicles. Glass covered the driveway like diamonds, crunching under his feet as he destroyed every window he could reach. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, police sirens cut through the night air. 2 patrol cars pulled into the driveway with their lights flashing red and blue across the house and trees. Walker didn't run or try to hide. He just stood there in the middle of all that broken glass, still gripping the tire iron, swaying on his feet and yelling that I'd ruined everything, that this was all my fault. The officers got out of their cars with their hands on their weapons, ordering him to drop the tire iron. He looked at them, then at the house where I was watching from the window, and for a second I thought he might charge at them too. Instead, he started yelling about how I'd ruined his sister's wedding, and this was all my fault while the cops kept telling him to drop the weapon. More guests came outside to watch, and I could see Lily pushing through the crowd in her wedding dress, mascara running down her face. The officers drew their tasers, and Walker finally seemed to notice them, looking down at the tire iron like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Walker went from just one drink at my sister's wedding to starring in his own personal action movie where he's both the villain and the guy who gets foam blasted in the face. Quite the character arc for one reception. He dropped it on the glass-covered driveway and started walking toward the cops with his hands out, still ranting about the wedding. They kept ordering him to get on the ground, but he just kept walking and talking until one officer fired his taser. The probes hit Walker in the chest and he went down hard, his whole body going rigid before he started convulsing on the pavement. They rushed over and cuffed him while he was still twitching, then rolled him onto his side. The paramedics showed up maybe 10 minutes later and went straight to Walker first, checking his vitals while he groaned and tried to sit up. Once they had him stable and loaded into the ambulance with a police escort, 2 of them came inside to look at my injuries. My shoulder was turning purple where the tire iron had connected, and there was a deep gash on my forearm that was still bleeding through the towel someone had wrapped around it. They cleaned the wound and said I'd need stitches, but suggested urgent care instead of the ER since it would be cheaper and faster. I spent the next hour sitting in the back of a patrol car, giving my statement to an officer who typed everything into his laptop. He took photos of my injuries, the broken glass, the damaged tent poles, and my car with its smashed windshield. He said Walker was looking at multiple felony charges, including assault with a deadly weapon, and that a detective would follow up with me. The urgent care center was mostly empty at 1 in the morning, so they got me right in. The doctor gave me 7 stitches in my forearm and ordered x-rays of my shoulder to make sure nothing was broken. Everything came back clear, but she prescribed pain medication and told me I was lucky the injuries weren't worse. I took photos of everything with my phone for evidence and made sure to keep all the paperwork. It was after 3 when I finally got home and found my phone full of texts from Lily. She was apologizing over and over, but also asking me not to press charges, saying Walker needed treatment, not jail time. She offered to pay all my medical bills and fix my car if I'd just tell the police it was a misunderstanding. I was too tired and angry to deal with her, so I just took my pain pills and went to bed. The next morning, a detective called to follow up on the case. He explained that even if I wanted to drop the charges, which I didn't, the state would proceed anyway because of the weapon and how many witnesses there were. He gave me a case number and the contact info for a victim advocate who could help me through the court process. My car was undrivable with the smashed windshield, so I had to call my insurance company to arrange a tow. The deductible was $500 that I really didn't have right now, but there was no other choice. The tow truck driver looked at the damage and said he'd seen worse, but never from a wedding reception. I had to get a rental car, which was another expense I couldn't afford. I called out sick from work because my shoulder was throbbing, despite the pain pills, and I couldn't focus on anything. My boss was understanding when I vaguely explained there'd been an incident, but I worried about burning through my sick days. I spent most of the day dealing with insurance paperwork and trying to rest. Lily called me 8 times before I finally picked up. She was crying about how Walker was still in jail, and their parents were devastated and this was going to ruin his life. She offered me $1,000 cash to tell the prosecutor it was all a misunderstanding and Walker hadn't really meant to hurt me. I hung up on her without saying anything. The next morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and the woman on the other end said she was from the victim advocate office. She explained that Walker would probably make bail within a day or 2, but would have conditions like no contact with me and no drinking and GPS monitoring. She walked me through getting a restraining order and said the paperwork was already started based on the police report. She told me about victim compensation funds for medical bills and property damage, but warned me the process could take months. When she mentioned Walker getting out soon, my stomach twisted into a knot and I had to sit down on my couch. That afternoon, I started seeing videos from the wedding popping up on Facebook and Instagram. Someone had filmed Walker grabbing the champagne from that guest and our tug of war over the glass. Another video showed him shoving the groom and knocking over chairs on his way out. The worst one was from outside when he came back with the tire iron, though. It cut off right before the attack. People I didn't even know were commenting on the video saying I should have just given him a drink, that I escalated things by spraying him with the soda gun, that I ruined a wedding over nothing. One person wrote that bartenders who act like cops deserve what they get. I spent hours reporting videos and blocking accounts, but they kept spreading. Walker's mom started a Facebook group called Justice for Walker, where his family posted about how I was some power-hungry bartender who attacked their son at his sister's wedding. They claimed I sprayed him unprovoked and that he only came back to talk to me peacefully. Someone posted that I was probably planning to sue them for money, and this was all a setup. Walker's cousin wrote a long post about how Walker had been sober for 6 months until I triggered him by embarrassing him in front of his whole family. The comments got worse and worse with people calling me names and saying I deserved the beating. Someone found my workplace online and posted it in the comments. I deactivated all my social media accounts after that. 3 days after the attack, I had to go to the police station to give my formal recorded statement. The detective had me go through everything from the beginning while a camera recorded it. He showed me security footage from a neighbor's Ring doorbell that caught Walker smashing car windows in the street after leaving the wedding. You could see him swinging the tire iron at 3 different cars, and the timestamp showed it was right before he came back to attack me. The detective said it was perfect evidence for the property damage charge charges and would help show his state of mind. He asked if I wanted to press charges for the bribe attempt from Lily, but I said no because I just wanted this to be over. That afternoon, I got a call from the prosecutor saying Walker had made bail. His parents put up their house as collateral, and he had to wear an ankle monitor and couldn't drink or contact me in any way. I drove straight to the hardware store and bought new deadbolts for my doors and a security camera system I couldn't really afford. I spent the rest of the day installing everything and checking the locks over and over. That night, every little sound made me jump. A car door slammed outside and I grabbed my phone ready to call 911. The ice maker in my freezer dropped cubes and I nearly had a heart attack. Around midnight, a cat knocked over a trash can in the alley, and I was sure it was Walker. I called 911 and told them someone was outside my apartment. 2 cops showed up and searched around but found nothing except the knocked over trash and some paw prints. They were nice about it, but I felt stupid wasting their time. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, Lily texted me saying Walker wanted to apologize and make things right and asked if I would meet with them and a mediator to work things out. She said Walker was getting help and just wanted to move forward. I screenshot the messages and forwarded them to the prosecutor, who called me within an hour. She said this was a clear violation of the no contact order since Lily was acting as a third party for Walker. She said she would contact Walker's bail supervisor and he would get an official warning. If he tried anything else through anyone, he would go back to jail. I went back to work the next week but couldn't focus on anything. Every time someone walked up behind my desk, I jumped. When a coworker tapped my shoulder to ask a question, I actually yelped. She asked if I was okay, and I made up some story about a minor car accident that had me jumpy. My boss noticed I was off and suggested I take some time, but I couldn't afford to miss work. Lying about why I was acting weird was exhausting, but explaining the truth seemed worse. I kept checking the parking lot for Walker's car, even though I knew he had the ankle monitor. The prosecutor's office called and scheduled a meeting to discuss the case. The prosecutor explained that if we went to trial, Walker was looking at 2 to 5 years for assault with a deadly weapon plus the property damage. But she said he would probably get offered a plea deal for 18 months if he agreed to anger management and stayed sober. She asked how I felt about a plea deal versus trial. 18 months seemed like nothing for what he did, but 5 years seemed like too much even for him. Either way, I would have to testify if it went to trial, and that made me sick to think about. My car insurance company called that same day to tell me they were totaling my car. The damage was too extensive and my car was too old to be worth fixing. The payout would barely cover what I still owed on the loan, leaving me with no car and no money for a down payment on another one. I had to start taking the bus to work, which added an hour each way to my commute. The bus stop was a 15-minute walk from my apartment, and I spent every second of it looking over my shoulder. 2 weeks after the attack, my shoulder still wouldn't rotate all the way, and the physical therapist had me doing these rubber band exercises 3 times a day. I'd wrap the band around a doorknob and pull it across my body 20 times, then switch angles and do 20 more, then 20 more after that. The therapist said the muscle damage might leave me with permanent limited range of motion, and I should prepare for that possibility. Lily's playing the butt family card while Walker's mom creates a Facebook group that makes him sound like Mother Teresa with a drinking problem. Classic move when your son commits assault with automotive tools. I filled out the workers' comp paperwork, but they denied it the same day since technically I wasn't at my regular job when it happened. The denial letter came with a number to appeal, but when I called, they said bartending a private event didn't count, even though I was getting paid. My regular insurance covered some of it, but the deductible alone was $500 I didn't have. While I was sorting through insurance paperwork, a certified letter arrived from Walker's lawyer proposing what they called a civil settlement. $5,000 if I'd write a letter to the judge asking for leniency in Walker's criminal case. My hands actually shook reading it, and I had to sit down at my kitchen table. The letter made it sound like I was being unreasonable, like Walker was the real victim here who just made one mistake at his sister's wedding. I called the victim advocate right away, and she said this was totally normal, that defense lawyers always try this, and it was completely my choice whether to even respond. I threw the letter in a drawer and tried to forget about it, but kept thinking about that $5,000 and how it would cover my medical bills, plus the down payment on a used car. 3 days later, my phone rang, and it was the DJ from the wedding saying he'd heard about what happened after everyone left and wanted to help however he could. He still had all his equipment recordings from that night, including his wireless mic that picked up Walker's threats crystal clear. He'd already made copies on USB drives and wanted to know where to send them. I got his contact info and forwarded everything to the prosecutor, who called me back within an hour, saying this was exactly the kind of evidence they needed. The preliminary hearing got scheduled for a month out, and I had to take another day off work to go to the courthouse downtown. Walker sat at the defense table in a navy suit, looking totally sober and somehow smaller than I remembered from the wedding. His whole family packed the benches behind him, and they all turned to stare when I walked in. His mom was in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and his dad sat with his arms crossed, glaring at me like I was the one who'd attacked his son. I had to sit in the witness chair and tell the whole story again, while Walker watched me from 20 feet away. The prosecutor walked me through everything step by step, from Lily asking me not to serve him to the tire iron attack in the driveway. When it was the defense lawyer's turn, he stood up and immediately started implying I'd made things worse by refusing to serve Walker at a family celebration. He asked if I'd ever worked as a bartender before, if I had any training in dealing with difficult customers, if I'd considered that maybe just giving Walker one drink would have prevented everything. The prosecutor kept objecting, but some questions got through anyway. The lawyer asked if I'd physically blocked Walker from the bar, if I'd grabbed the champagne glass from his hand, if I'd embarrassed him in front of his family. Each question made it sound like I was the aggressor, and Walker was just defending himself. By the time I left the witness stand, I felt dirty and small, like maybe I really had caused all this by not just giving him a beer. But the judge looked at all the evidence, including the DJ's recordings and the photos of my car, and found sufficient evidence for trial on all charges. Walker's family gasped when she read the decision, and his mother started crying harder. His dad stood up so fast his lawyer had to grab his arm to keep him from walking out. Lily was there, in the back row, and when everyone filed out, she wouldn't even look at me, just stared at her phone while Walker's family surrounded her in the hallway. The medical bills started showing up a week later in a steady stream that wouldn't stop. First the emergency room visit for $800 after insurance, then the follow-up appointment for $200. Then each physical therapy session at $75 a pop, 3 times a week for 6 weeks. The MRI to check for nerve damage was $1,200, and even Even though insurance covered most of it, I still owed $300. I set up payment plans for everything. $25 a month here, $50 there, until I had so many automatic payments I had to write them all down to keep track. My credit card was already maxed from the car rental I'd needed before buying a beater off Craigslist, and now these medical payments stretched my budget so thin I was eating ramen 5 nights a week. The prosecutor called on a Tuesday afternoon with what she called good news and bad news. Walker's lawyer wanted to make a deal where he'd plead guilty to assault and property damage, serve 2 years with possibility of parole in 8 months, and pay restitution for my car and medical bills. The bad news was, if we went to trial and lost, Walker might walk free entirely, and even if we won, he might get the same sentence anyway after appeals. She needed my input, but made it clear that trials were risky and juries could be unpredictable, especially with Walker's family there looking respectable. I had 48 hours to decide, and she'd support whatever choice I made. That night, I couldn't sleep at all, just laid there staring at the ceiling and doing math in my head. 8 months seemed like nothing for what he did to me in my car. 8 months and he'd be out while I'd still be paying medical bills and dealing with a shoulder that might never work right again. But then I thought about sitting through a whole trial, watching his family cry, having his lawyer make me look like the bad guy again and again. The victim advocate called the next morning to check on me and reminded me there was no wrong choice, that whatever I decided was valid, but that didn't make it any easier. My shoulder ached as I tossed and turned the second night, taking ibuprofen every 4 hours and still not able to get comfortable. I kept thinking about Walker, getting out in 8 months, probably less with good behavior, while I'd still be taking the bus to work. But I also thought about him having a felony on his record forever, about him having to pay me back, about not having to see his family in court again. On the last morning of my 48 hours, I called the prosecutor and said I'd agree to the plea deal, but only with conditions. Full restitution for all medical bills and property damage, not just some of it. Mandatory anger management and substance abuse treatment for the entire probation period, not just the jail time. And a restraining order that covered not just me, but my workplace too. The prosecutor said those were all reasonable additions, and she'd present them to Walker's lawyer immediately. 4 hours later, she called back to say they'd accepted everything. 2 weeks later, I sat in the courtroom watching Walker shuffle in, wearing an orange jumpsuit and shackles that made a soft clinking sound with each step. His lawyer guided him to the defense table, while his parents and some aunts I recognized from the wedding filled the rows behind him. My side of the courtroom stayed empty, except for the victim advocate who'd been assigned to my case. Walker kept his eyes down as the judge read through the charges and asked how he wanted to plead. Guilty, he said in this flat voice that barely carried to where I sat. The judge went through each count, making Walker admit to the specific facts of what he'd done that night. Yes, he'd brought the tire iron to the wedding. Yes, he'd struck me multiple times. Yes, he'd destroyed my car. His voice never changed, just this monotone recitation while his mother sobbed quietly behind him. The judge accepted the plea and sentenced him to 2 years in state prison with eligibility for parole after 8 months with a good behavior. Walker's shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't turn around to look at his family. The judge then ordered $3,500 in restitution to be paid in monthly installments, starting immediately upon his release. As the bailiff led Walker away, his parents stood up and started moving toward the aisle where I was heading out. His mother's face was red and puffy from crying, but when she saw me, her expression hardened. "You ruined our son's life," she said, loud enough that everyone still in the courtroom turned to look. The victim advocate stepped between us immediately, putting her hand up to create distance. "Ma'am, you need to step back," she said firmly, while Walker's father pulled his wife's arm. "He made a mistake, and you sent him to prison," his mother continued, trying to look around the advocate at me. "He needed help, not jail." The advocate guided me out a different door while security approached Walker's parents. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. She said she understood why I'd testified and pressed charges, but couldn't forgive me for sending her brother to prison. Her family was destroyed, her parents weren't speaking to each other, and she'd never be able to look at her wedding photos without remembering what happened. She mentioned the $200 for bartending was in the mail and asked me not to contact her again. The check arrived 4 days later, but I never cashed it. I stuck it in a drawer where it sat, getting more crumpled every time I looked for something else. The first restitution payment was supposed to come 30 days after Walker's release, but nothing showed up. I had to file paperwork with the court's victim services office, which took another 3 weeks to process. When the payment finally came, it was $50 short. This started a pattern where every payment arrived late or incomplete, requiring constant follow-up calls and forms. The woman at victim services knew my voice after the third call and would sigh when I said my case number. "The system's overwhelmed," she'd tell me every time. "We're doing our best to enforce compliance. The justice system serving up justice with all the speed of DMV on a Monday. Walker gets 8 months while our narrator gets payment plans that'll outlast his sentence." 3 months after the attack, I still went to physical therapy twice a week. My shoulder had healed enough that I could use it, but certain movements sent sharp pains down my arm. Reaching for things on high shelves, throwing anything, even sleeping on that side wrong would leave me hurting for days. The therapist kept adjusting my exercises, but finally admitted this was probably as good as it would get. "Some injuries leave permanent changes," she said while watching me struggle with a resistance band. "You'll learn to work around it." Cold weather made it worse, the joint aching like an old man's whenever the temperature dropped. 5 months into Walker's sentence, I got a call from someone identifying herself as his prison counselor. She explained they had a restorative justice program where offenders could apologize to their victims as part of their rehabilitation. Walker wanted to participate and write me a letter expressing his remorse. I cut her off before she could finish the pitch. "I don't want his apology," I said. "I just want him to leave me alone." She sounded disappointed, mentioning how the program helped with healing and closure, but I hung up. 2 days later, she called again, and I blocked the number. 6 months later, I got an automated call from victim services saying Walker was released early due to good behavior and prison overcrowding. 8 months had turned into 6. The victim advocate called an hour later to assure me the restraining order was still in effect, and Walker knew he couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my workplace. I went to the hardware store that afternoon and bought new locks for my doors, a motion sensor light for my driveway, and one of those doorbell cameras everyone has now. The fear that had been fading came rushing back, making me check my mirrors constantly while driving. 2 weeks after his release, I was buying groceries when I saw Lily by the produce section. We locked eyes for maybe 2 seconds before she grabbed her cart and turned down another aisle. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent lights as she walked away, a small diamond that sparkled when she moved her hand. I stood there holding a bag of of apples, realizing I'd never found out if her marriage had survived everything that happened. Part of me wanted to follow her and ask, but I just finished my shopping and left. My car situation never really got better despite the restitution payments that trickled in. I bought a 15-year-old sedan for $800 that needed new tires and made a grinding noise when I turned left. Every time it broke down, which happened at least once a month, I'd sit on the side of the road waiting for a tow truck and remember my decent car that Walker had destroyed with that tire iron. The anger felt different now, less sharp, but constant, like a bruise that never quite healed. 3 months after his release, I got another automated call. Walker had violated his parole by failing an alcohol test and was going back to prison for another 4 months. The victim notification system told me this in the same robotic voice that reminded me about court dates. Nobody from the prosecutor's office called. Nobody from victim services followed up. The relief hit me immediately, but I knew it was temporary. 4 months would pass quickly, and then he'd be out again and the cycle would continue. A year later, I was bartending a retirement party at the country club when a guy in a navy suit walked up and ordered a whiskey neat. My hand stopped halfway to the bottle and just hung there in the air while my brain tried to process the request. The guy waited patiently while I forced my fingers to close around the bottleneck and pour the drink with hands that only shook a little bit. He tipped me $20 and walked away, never knowing he'd just watched me fight a small war with myself. 2 months after that, the final restitution payment showed up in my mailbox, a check for $612 when the court had ordered $900. The letter from the state said pursuing the remaining amount would cost more in legal fees than I'd recover, so they were closing the case. I deposited the check and deleted the victim services number from my phone, tired of fighting for money that would never come. I was buying coffee at the place near my apartment when someone called my name, and I turned to see the photographer from Lily's wedding holding an iced latte. She told me Lily and her husband had gotten divorced 8 months ago, that the family never really recovered after that night, that Walker had torn them all apart. She pulled out her phone and showed me this perfect photo from the reception before everything went bad. Lily laughing in her dress with the string lights glowing behind her. I looked at it and felt nothing, just empty space where anger or sadness should have been. My shoulder started aching bad during a rainstorm that winter, and I realized it was going to do that forever now. My body turned into a weather station. Physical therapy had ended 6 months earlier when my insurance stopped covering it, and I couldn't afford the $100 copays anymore. I learned to lift things differently, to sleep on my left side, to take ibuprofen before storms rolled in. 2 years after the attack, Walker's restraining order expired, and I had to go back to court to petition for renewal. He didn't show up to contest it, didn't send a lawyer, didn't file any paperwork, and somehow that felt worse than if he'd fought it. Like I wasn't even worth the effort of harassing anymore, just some nobody he'd forgotten about. The judge renewed it for another 2 years in less than 5 minutes. I still took bartending gigs sometimes, but never worked alone anymore, always making sure another person was behind the bar with me. The money was decent, and I was good at it, but I kept a fire extinguisher within arm's reach now, not for fires, but because it was heavy and metal, and could stop someone if I needed it to. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning from dreams about filing paperwork and sitting in courtrooms and opening medical bills. My therapist said this was progress, that my brain was processing the trauma into something mundane instead of terrifying. I told her I wasn't sure boring nightmares were better than scary ones, but she said boring meant healing. 3 years after that night, I was different, but functioning, working full-time at a restaurant supply company and bartending weekends for extra cash. The money never fully sorted itself out. Between legal fees and medical bills and lost work, I was still probably $10,000 in the hole. My shoulder hurt every time the pressure dropped, and I automatically checked exits whenever I walked into a new place. But I was paying rent and buying groceries and going to movies with friends sometimes. Some fights don't have winners or losers, just people who survive them and keep going, carrying their scars and doing their best to build something normal on top of the damage. Life's got a funny way of tossing curveballs at us, or I guess in this case, resistance bands that remind you things don't always go back to the way they were. Thanks for sticking with me through it. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.